Hey, what's up? So, this is a funny play about tragedy. Tragedy. So, 5 years ago when I was living in New York City, I was assaulted. And, I got traumatic brain injury and PTSD, and I couldn't even remember how to tie my shoes. But, don't worry, I bought a lot of slip-on shoes. And I got better enough. So I'm sitting in this MFA1 theater history class with Dr. Chris Jones, who wrote this book. That's kind of weird. It says brighter, Chris Jones louder. Like the book is telling Chris Jones to be brighter and louder. That's okay. So anyway, there was this running joke in the class where Chris Jones would always say, like, hey, let's just say that you go to see some crappy one-man show and it's called Mike Stock, My Tragic Life and Misery, and pip pip and what. And so, I should say first of all that sounded nothing like Chris Jones. So anyway, ever since Chris Jones joked about it, I have been secretly writing that show for 1 hour every day to try to understand what happened to me and what happened to me, and to try to get some peace. Peace. Okay, that's the Mercedes-Benz sign. Okay, whatever. So basically, I've been writing secretly. Let's see. Well, usually I write like a lot of pages, like 50 pages an hour. So 365 days times 2 years times 50 pages an hour. That's 100. 136. Oh, you gotta carry the zero. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So 365. Okay, I think that's right. So basically, I've been writing this play that is about 36,500 pages, and it's about my secret life and misery. So I thought that tonight, I wouldn't read you the whole play, but it is the first time I've read any of it out loud. So, here we go. So when I was in high school, Mrs. Kelly, who we used to call Bulldog Kelly, she's my teacher, and she said to me, she was teaching us about tragedy, and she said to me, that sounded like Chris Jones too, actually. She said, Mike, if a piano were to fall on your head, and you were a character in a play, and you died, now that falling piano might appear tragic, but it wouldn't actually be theatrical tragedy. And so, so I write, scene 1, enter Mike Stock. He's wearing a DePaul theater hat, and suddenly he gets hit by a fucking piano. Wham! Okay, last time it looked kind of like a banana, so I'm gonna just try to make a piano. Right? I think that's the piano. And I don't remember how to make note signs. I think that's like an ampersand. And then here is Mike Stock, and he's clearly sad. And apparently he has a beard. I don't know what happened, and I don't know. But he looks sad. He's dead because the piano fell on him. So anyway, Miss Kelly said, if a piano falls on your head and you die, it's not actually theatrical tragedy. Okay. So look, I got hit by a fucking piano. It sounds pretty tragic. I mean, I was probably trying to rush to buy some slip-on shoes, and wham, I got hit by a fucking piano. So so why wouldn't that be tragic to anyone? I mean, aside from me and my mom. So I write scene 2. And scene 2 is enter Aristotle. Now he's dressed like that guy from the Little Caesars pizza. And Aristotle says, tragedy is about man versus God. You know what, wait, let me just cut the rest of this monologue here. This first monologue is like, It's all Greek to me. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Blah, 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 tragedy. Whew, that's a really long opening monologue, huh? No wonder the play is 37,000 pages. Okay, but anyway, Little Caesar, he agrees with Bulldog Kelly and he says, my death isn't a tragedy. Because tragedy is the downfall of important people. And the audience doesn't know you're important. What you need is more plot. See, in Greek tragedy, plot is the most important. So, it says number 1 is plot. Number 2 is character. This is Greek tragedy we're talking about. And number 3 is concept. Okay, cool. So I'm like, oh, see, if the plot, if you wore like a crown instead of a DePaul baseball hat, then people would think that you were important because you'd be a king, and then your death would matter. And so I'm like, oh yeah, cool, I think I'm starting to see now. And Aristotle's like, yeah, well, that's actually what Oedipus said before he blinded himself, so just be careful with that. Anyway, Oedipus says you have to have some fatal flaw, because if you don't have a fatal flaw that leads to your own death, then you lack hamartia. And I'm like, hamartia? Wasn't that the oldest sister in the Brady Bunch? And you know what? I'm not writing hamartia on the board because I don't know how to spell it, okay? So anyway, I'm like, so wait, if no one cares, if it wasn't my fault, then no one cares, and no one cares about the victims if it's not my fault. And Aristotle's like, no, actually, no one cares about Polonius when he's killed in Hamlet. And who's going to remember or care about you when you're dead? To be a tragedy, he says, the plot needs a moment of anagnorisis. And I'm like, anagnorisis? It sounds like a reason to visit the dentist. At least I'm not writing anagnorisis on the board. I don't know how to spell it, okay? And Aristotle's like, no. Anagnorisis is when the character has this light bulb moment and they realize that they're guilty. And it's all their fault. I think I'm going to try to write a light bulb moment, but I'm guessing it's going to look kind of like a baseball. Okay, that looks kind of light bulby. All right, so the character has this light bulb moment and then anagnorisis, and they realize it's all their fault. So I ask Aristotle, was it my fault that these guys attacked me? And I say, you know what, the guilt that you're talking about, it just sounds like religion teaching us to be submissive. And to me, that's just some like Catholic, waspy, Jewish shit. And so then I write scene 2. I didn't mention the Mormons, okay? So I write, I don't know about the Mormon guilt, okay? So it's like a lot of Jewish shit, and I write scene 2, and Mel Brooks comes running on stage. Mel Brooks is like, a tragedy is if something bad happens to me, but a comedy is when you fall in a hole and die. And I'm like, what? And Mel Brooks is like, yeah. It's like when you tell someone a funny story about something that happened to you that's really awful, but it happened to you a long time ago. It's the distance from real pain that makes it funny. And I'm like, you know what, Mel Brooks, I don't think that would happen to me in New York will ever be funny. And Mel Brooks is like, well, what do you think you're doing right now? The sad clown laughs so he doesn't have to cry. And then Mel Brooks slips on a banana peel and he falls in a hole and he dies. And Aristotle says, look, ancient Greeks were known for our orgies and our Little Caesar pizza, but no one wrote Oedipus the musical. So let me bring in Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare because their tragedies are really funny. So then I write scene 3. Marlowe and Shakespeare enter. Now Marlowe's dressed like Sid Vicious, and Shakespeare looks like Kurt Cobain. You know, it's like, okay, suddenly this bar fight breaks out. And like me, Chris Marlowe gets beat up by this bunch of assholes. But even worse than me because, and this happened in his real life, but as it happened in his own life, Chris Marlowe gets stabbed in the eye. And he starts to die. So, he's dying. And downstage right, this crowd of BFA actors who are actually on stage crew, but you know they're dressed up as if they're characters in a crowd. And they start, right? Yeah, And they start to crowd around as he starts to die. But see, at this very moment, on stage left, Mike Stock enters. And suddenly, a fucking piano falls on Mike Stock, and he is dead. Now, okay, Shakespearean tragedy is very different than Greek tragedy. Because Greek said that tragedy is man versus God. But Shakespeare said, what if there is no God? So I write this monologue for Shakespeare to say while Marlowe's dying. And I write it in this rhyming iambic pentameter so that, the audience will forget that I'm secretly writing about when I came back from New York and I thought I might die or kill myself. Or whatever. Shit, I just actually think I told you the secret. Okay, well, you know what? What happens in Vegas stays in this workshop. So, so anyway, the BFAs, they look back, they see Mike Stock smashed under the piano, and if they immediately realize the death of Mike Stock, it's not really a big deal. And so they turn back to Billy Shakes, and Shakespeare says, what if there is no heaven or hell? If there's no God, when dead, where will he dwell? Will he die at peace with his conscience clear? Will friends talk bad about him when he's gone? Does he die thinking about all his fears? Who will sing his praises in funeral songs? Or does he die happy, not to endure more of the pain, finally free from the strife of his brain, at peace in death more than in his troubled life? But when he's dead, I'll always be mourning. Death comes to all, but tragedy gives no warning. And then the lights fade on Shakespeare and Marlowe, and the fucking crowd would be fixed. And I say to Aristotle, I'm like, well, you know what? I wouldn't care about my own death next to Marlowe's. I mean, Chris Marlowe is this king of the theater, and you see, that's when Arthur Miller enters. He comes in to say that my death as a regular person matters as much as the death of a king. So scene 4, enter Arthur Miller, and he's carrying Willy Loman's suitcase. And Arthur Miller is like, your character is wearing this DePaul hat, so the audience will feel bad for you because you'll never pay back your student loans. also, see, this tragedy, he says, is about a man versus the system. So that piano was obviously hanging here by some faulty-ass cheap cables because the boss is making money rather than caring about the little guy. So, and actually, he says that's a very good plot. Oh, and speaking of plots, Arthur Miller says, character is the most important, and plot is the second, and concept is the third. Now, your character can't just be like this passive victim hit by a piano. A tragic hero is a little guy who fights against oppression. Little guy. Repression. Suppression. Impression. Concussion. Conclusion. Confusion. Depression. So anyway, scene 1, revised. Enter Mike Stock. He's at a work event, and there's this group of bouncers, and they're confused about the rules. And this one bouncer, who looks remarkably like steroidal Alex Rodriguez, says that no one can fucking leave. So Mike, tries to calm everyone down, but A-Rod has this bad impression of Mike because, he's dressed like some artsy-fartsy weirdo. So then the crowd pushes to get out, and Mike Stock, he's pushed from behind into A-Rod, and A-Rod throws Mike, boom, head first into this metal guardrail, and Mike blacks out unconscious. And then Mike Stock gets up. But then 4 of the bouncers beat him unconscious 2 more times. And anyway, suddenly a fucking piano falls on him. Wham! And Mike Stock's dead. And so anyway, Arthur Miller's like, you see, those bouncers, they abused their power to give you concussions. And after you got knocked out that third time, you called the cops to come help you, but the bouncers were friends with the cops, so they told the cops that you were drunk, which you weren't, and that you fell down and hurt yourself because you fell down drunk, which you didn't. And then the conclusion is that people in power literally were beating up on the little guy. Okay, so that's when Chris Jones enters again. And he's like, hey, Mike. That scene triggered some sort of PTSD flashback. And you're in a state of confusion or depression. But see, you're struggling with yourself, what you did wrong. So let's bring in Samuel Beckett, who thought that tragedy was about man versus themselves. See, he wrote plays like this one, which are tragic comedies about concepts. Aha! Concept is first, character is second. Oh, there are 2 twos now. I think in Beckett, third. Plot is third, but it just nothing really happens. I think it's kind of third. So anyway, I write, scene 5, enter Samuel Beckett. And Samuel Beckett's like, yes, Christians! As I once wrote, nothing is funnier than unhappiness. It's the most comical thing in the world. And then Beckett puts on a bowler hat from his play, Waiting for Godot, and he carries on this tree that's got no leaves. And Beckett is like, every day at precisely 2 minutes from now, a piano kills me dead. Can I just leave so I don't get hit by a piano? But wherever I go, I'm still with myself. Well, actually, I've probably got 2 minutes less because I've spent more than 2 minutes talking about how to forget that I will someday die alone. At least in this theater, we're all alone together. I could whistle a happy tune until the piano falls on me, so at least I die happy. Oh, perhaps I should hang myself from this tree, but since I carried it on, I'd have to hold it up, and then I wouldn't have my hands free in order to tie the noose. No, I just guess I choose to live, and to do my life my way. And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain, and let the record show I took the blows, I took the blows, I took the blows, but I did it my way. Oh shit, the piano. And that's when Sam Beckett looks up, terrified that the piano's falling. But you know, he also kind of looks up kind of aimlessly, like he's just checking the sky for rain. And he's, oh, you know, perhaps I miscounted. Perhaps it's actually 2 minutes from now. And he says, look, I'm a tree. And he strikes the tree yoga pose, and then nothing happens. And then everything happens. And apparently life is nothing and life is everything. And Chris Jones is like, you see, Mike, you know, your life fell apart because, like, in Beckett's plays which are absurd, which are funny and absurd and tragic, because life, like yours, is absurd and tragic and funny. There have always been artists who have led absurdly tragic lives and suffered absurdly tragic deaths. Scene 6. Enter Sarah Kane. And Chris Jones is like, Sarah Kane was a playwright and an emerging theatrical genius. She committed suicide 2 weeks after her 28th birthday. And then Chris Jones reads from his Chicago Tribune review of Sarah Kane's Blasted that they did at Red Orchid. And he says, the work of Sarah Kane is what British critics termed a filthy piece of garbage by an unworthy young woman. This is the same play that many great playwrights said was too good for critics to ever understand. Now, as in Sarah Kane's own plays, there are no stage directions in this next scene. And you, as the audience, should just imagine your own staging. Because Sarah Kane says, I have reached the end of this dreary and repugnant tale. I have been dead for a long time. I think that you think of me the way I'd have you think of me. The final period, the full stop. And then, as in her own life, Sarah Kane tragically hangs herself and dies. And there is a long, painfully longer silence. And then, scene 7. Enter Mike Stock's mom. And Mike's mom says, you know, Mike, the doctors told us that you would never recover. But once you got better, you told me that you had this light bulb moment that you never make art again. And you threw away that t-shirt that you've been wearing since junior high that said, "Fear no art." And you said that if you just stopped being an artist, that no one would attack you. And you could live and hide and live a safe life. And that was the fatal flaw of the world, who doesn't know how to accept people that are uniquely different. Scene 7. Just like in the final scene of Death of a Salesman, this scene is called Requiem. At scene 7, Mike's mom gathers the writers into one community, and they stand around the dead body of Sarah Kane. And Aristotle reads from his treatise from Nicomachean Ethics, book number 1, and says, only when she is dead can one safely call her blessed, as being now beyond the reach of evil and misfortune. And Christopher Marlowe reads from his play Dr. Faustus. Thinkest thou that she who saw the face of God and tasted the eternal joy of heaven is not tormented in being deprived of everlasting bliss? And Shakespeare reads from Hamlet. Now cracks a noble heart. Good night. And flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. And Beckett reads from his recently discovered abandoned works. He says, I too shall cease, and be as when I was not yet. That makes me happy. And I weep for happiness as I go along. And Arthur Miller reads from Death of a Salesman and says, she was a human being, and a terrible thing happened to her. They called her crazy, but attention must be paid. And Mike's mom says, Mike, you want to say something? You know, your character hasn't spoken in your own words in more than half this play. And so then I, Mike Stock, say, you know, when Shakespeare's Hamlet considers suicide, we all consider it too. And when Willy Loman and Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman commit suicide, then we think about how precious is our own life. And when the Beckett's tramps and Godot, when they try to hang themselves from the tree, we all laugh at our own pain. But when an artist like Sarah Kane kills herself, we all weep. Let us all tell Sarah Kane's story, and tell all of our stories, and tell all of these stories until the end of time. And then there is a long silence, and Mike Stock looks up for the falling piano, and then he looks back to you, the audience, and says, let us all tell stories alone together so that the piano never falls again. And that is the end and the beginning. He nods to the audience. He walks off stage, and there's a